You ever imagine standing in a courtroom, your own mother sitting across from you, not as comfort or support, but as the sharpest voice raised against you? That's exactly where I found myself, and let me tell you, it felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. Before I dive into the moment when the Chief Justice himself stood up and silenced the entire hall with just one sentence, let me set the stage, because this story isn't just about betrayal or law, it's about resilience, identity, and the strange way truth can echo louder than lies. And if you've ever been doubted, underestimated, or had even your family turn their back on you, then this story is for you. So stick with me till the end, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that hit straight to the heart, because what you're about to hear will make you rethink what loyalty really means. The morning of the trial was cold, the kind of damp chill that seeped into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. I remember tightening the knot of my tie with trembling fingers, staring at my own reflection in the cracked mirror of the courthouse bathroom. My mother's words from the night before still rang in my ears, "You've never been enough. You can barely hold a job. You'll never be more than a disappointment." It wasn't the first time I'd heard those words, but it was the first time I knew she was about to put them on public record, under oath, in front of a full courtroom. That cut deeper than anything else. I walked into the courtroom trying to keep my shoulders squared, my face calm, but the murmur of voices quieting as I entered made it impossible to ignore the weight of judgment already hanging in the air. The opposing counsel smirked, the kind of smirk that told me they thought they already had this case in the bag. And then she entered, my mother, wearing her best dress, pearls at her throat, her hair perfectly styled. She looked less like a grieving parent, and more like someone walking into a gala, certain of her performance. When she took the stand and swore the oath, her voice didn't tremble. Mine did, though. Inside my chest, my heart pounded against my ribs like a prisoner desperate to escape. I wanted to believe she would stop short of total destruction, that somewhere deep down maternal love would keep her from tearing apart her own son's life. But then the first words left her mouth, and the courtroom air changed. "He can barely hold a job," she said, her voice cold, steady, rehearsed. "He's never been stable, never been reliable. I don't trust him with money, I don't trust him with responsibility, and I certainly don't trust him with the future of this family." I felt as though I'd been stripped naked in front of everyone, every private failure dragged out under the harsh light of accusation. Whispers rippled through the gallery, each one another dagger. The judge looked at me, then back at her, jotting notes as though her words were gospel. For a moment I thought this was it, I was finished, condemned not by strangers, but by the one person meant to lift me up. But that's the funny thing about truth, it finds its way to the surface, even if it has to fight its way through layers of lies and betrayal. The silence after my mother's words wasn't just silence, it was a living thing, crawling up the walls of that courtroom and sinking its claws into my skin. I could hear the faint scratching of pens against notepads, the occasional cough, the rustle of papers, but it all blended into a suffocating blanket of judgment pressing down on me. I wanted to stand up, shout that it wasn't true, list every job I'd worked, every bill I'd paid, every responsibility I'd carried without complaint. But what good would that do? She was my mother, and in the eyes of strangers, a mother's word carried weight. She was supposed to know me better than anyone else. And if she was willing to sit there, under oath, and call me a failure, who would doubt her? I sat at my table, hands folded so tightly the knuckles turned white, and tried to keep my breathing steady. My attorney leaned over, whispering, "Don't react. The more you stay calm, the more their words will crumble on their own." Easy for him to say. It wasn't his mother tearing him apart. It wasn't his childhood memories being rewritten into a narrative of incompetence. I stared down at the documents spread before me, the 2-page piece of paper I had kept hidden in my folder like a final card in a rigged deck. I told myself to wait. Timing mattered. I thought about the sacrifices I had made, the nights I had worked double shifts just to put food on the table, the mornings I had left before sunrise and returned after midnight so that she wouldn't have to worry about bills. She never once thanked me. Instead, she stored every mistake, every moment of weakness, like bullets in a gun she was now firing freely at me. The opposing lawyer's questions came sharp and deliberate, feeding her words, polishing them into something damning. Would you say your son has ever been financially stable? No. Would you trust him to manage assets responsibly? Absolutely not. Do you believe he is capable of long-term commitment or discipline? He never has been, so why would he start now? Each answer was like a stone added to the pile burying me alive. The jury shifted in their seats, their expressions tightening. My throat burned, not with tears, but with a rage so raw I could taste iron at the back of my tongue. I wanted to meet her eyes, force her to see what she was doing, but she never looked at me. Not once. She kept her gaze steady on the lawyer, as though I was nothing more than a defendant on a list. I remembered birthdays when she had smiled at me across a cake, her hands resting proudly on my shoulders. I remembered the nights she used to tell me I was strong, that I would make her proud. Was that all a lie, or had something changed in her heart so deeply that she could no longer recognize me? It was in that crushing moment of silence between her answers that something unexpected stirred. The Chief Justice shifted in his seat. He was an older man, his hair silver, his presence towering not by size but by the respect he commanded. Every movement of his hand drew the eyes of the entire room. He adjusted his glasses, leaned forward slightly, and studied my mother with a gaze that cut sharper than any lawyer's question. My pulse quickened, though I didn't know why. Something was changing, though I couldn't put a name to it yet. Then he cleared his throat, softly, but it echoed through the room like a gavel. Everyone went still. My mother, confident a second ago, hesitated, her lips parting but no sound coming out. And then, with measured words, he asked a question that sliced through the facade she had built. "Tell me, ma'am," he said, his voice calm, deliberate, carrying weight beyond authority. "Have you ever considered the sacrifices he may have made? Or have you only measured his worth by your expectations?" The courtroom froze. My mother blinked, caught off guard, her mouth opening, then closing. For the first time since she had taken the stand, she looked uncertain. And that flicker of doubt, it was the first crack in the walls she had built around her lies. The Chief Justice's question didn't just hang in the air, it echoed, resonating against the wooden panels of the courtroom like a bell tolling in a cathedral. My mother's face, which had been a mask of cold certainty only moments before, shifted ever so slightly. A crease formed between her brows, her hands tightened on the edge of the witness stand, and for the first time since the trial began, she hesitated. That hesitation wasn't lost on anyone. The jury leaned forward, eyes narrowing, whispering ceased entirely, and the opposing lawyer quickly shuffled his notes as though trying to regain control of the script he thought was airtight. My attorney glanced at me with the faintest flicker of a smile, as if to say, "Do you see? The cracks are showing." I didn't smile back, though, I couldn't. Inside me, emotions warred with one another, anger, betrayal, grief, and now, something dangerously close to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth was finally beginning to fight its way to the surface. My mother finally spoke, her voice less steady now, tinged with a nervous edge. "Sacrifices? He's had jobs, yes, but nothing lasting. Nothing meaningful. He was supposed to do better, to become more. I raised him with higher expectations than this. And he never," she trailed off, the sentence dying midair, her certainty unraveling thread by thread. The Chief Justice leaned back, his sharp eyes never leaving her face. "Expectations," he repeated softly, though his voice carried to every corner of the room. "It seems to me, ma'am, that you've confused your expectations with his failures. Did he ever ask you to measure him against your dreams? Or did you simply decide that his were not enough?" The silence that followed was suffocating, but not for me. For the first time, it wasn't me under the spotlight, it was her. I sat there, almost stunned, as my mother shifted uncomfortably, her perfectly practiced composure breaking apart. She fidgeted with her pearls, looked down at her hands, then back at the lawyer as if silently begging for a way out. But none came. The opposing attorney cleared his throat, attempting to steer her back into safer waters. "Ma'am, let's remain focused," he said quickly. "You've testified that your son has difficulty maintaining employment and—" The Chief Justice raised a hand, silencing him instantly. The room felt charged, like a storm waiting to break. His next words came measured but carried a weight that made even the jury stiffen. "I've reviewed the records," he said, his tone clipped, controlled. "And I've seen the file you attempted to minimize." He turned his gaze toward me briefly, then back to my mother. 12 years of employment, multiple commendations, volunteer work logged consistently, and even community initiatives organized. "Tell me, ma'am, does that sound like someone who can barely hold a job?" Gasps rippled through the gallery. My chest tightened, heat rushing up my neck. That was my file. The very record I had guarded, the one that told the truth of who I was and what I had done, not for applause, not for recognition, but simply because it mattered to me to contribute, to provide, to be responsible. My mother's eyes widened, panic flashing in them for the first time. She stammered, that's not the whole picture. He may have tried those things, but he never," her words faltered again, collapsing under the weight of evidence. And then it happened, the moment I'll never forget. The Chief Justice, who had remained seated all this time, suddenly rose to his feet. His robe shifted with the movement, the silence in the room turning from tense to electric. Everyone's eyes were locked on him. Even my mother froze, her lips parted, her confidence shattered. His voice, though calm, carried the authority of decades, of a man who had seen truth and lies alike play out before him countless times. "He's been more than you've given him credit for," he said firmly, his gaze unwavering. "And from where I stand, this court sees a man who has carried weight you refuse to acknowledge. Not an unemployed failure, but someone who has survived in spite of being dragged down by those who should have lifted him up." The words struck like thunder. My throat closed up, my vision blurred as if tears were trying to force their way out, but I clenched my jaw to hold them back. I had promised myself I wouldn't cry in this courtroom, not in front of her, not in front of strangers. But to hear those words, not from a friend, not from someone who pitied me, but from the highest authority in that room, it was like someone had reached into my chest and pulled me back from drowning. The gallery murmured again, but this time the whispers weren't pity, they were awe, agreement, sympathy. People were no longer looking at me with judgment, but with respect. For once, I wasn't the one on trial in their eyes. And yet, even in that moment of vindication, I could see it in her face, my mother wasn't done. She wasn't going to surrender easily. Her eyes hardened, her jaw set. She leaned forward, gripping the edge of the stand with both hands, her voice rising again though it trembled at the edges. "You don't understand. You don't know what he's like behind closed doors, how he's failed, how he's disappointed this family again and again. You only see the papers, the record. You don't see the truth." The Chief Justice didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his presence towering. "On the contrary, ma'am," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "I see more truth in his silence, in the weight he's carried without your support, than in the accusations you've hurled with such eagerness today. A mother's testimony should illuminate her child's character, not attempt to bury it alive. Perhaps the question we should be asking is not whether he has failed you, but whether you have failed him." The courtroom erupted, some gasps, some murmurs, and one or two audible exclamations that the bailiff quickly hushed. I sat frozen, every nerve in my body buzzing, trying to process what had just been said. In that moment, something fundamental shifted. The trial was no longer about whether I could prove myself, it was about exposing the truth of the dynamics that had haunted me for years. And though I hadn't yet spoken a single word, for the first time, it felt like my voice was finally being heard. The courtroom was still in shock, every breath held as if the very air was afraid to move when the Chief Justice rose from his seat, his robe flowing like a wave of authority, his expression unreadable yet carrying the weight of centuries of law and truth. My mother, still standing at the witness stand, her face flushed with the glow of her supposed victory, clutched her pearls as though she had delivered the fatal blow to her own son. The silence was deep, like a storm hovering just before the thunder strikes, and then the Chief Justice's voice cut through it like a sword, "He's been more than you'll ever know." The words shattered the smugness from my mother's face, and suddenly, the room seemed to shrink, every eye now focused on the judge as though he had just opened a hidden book of secrets that no one expected. You see, what no one in that room, not even my mother who gave birth to me, understood was that I had lived two lives. The one they saw and mocked, the one where I stumbled from job to job, always the black sheep in the family, always the man who could barely hold a job, and then the life that no one knew, a life of shadows, battles, and sacrifices that never made it into polite conversation at family dinners. And here, in this sacred space of justice, someone had seen, someone had understood, and now, it was all about to come to light. But before I reveal what the Chief Justice meant, before I unravel why the most powerful man in the room had stood up for me, I want you, dear viewer, to hold on to this moment. Make sure you subscribe, because stories like this, stories that twist, stories that reveal the truth hidden beneath years of lies, are what we bring to you, and you won't want to miss the way this unfolds. The Chief Justice's words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My mother staggered back, whispering under her breath, "What does he mean?" But it was too late. The gallery leaned forward, reporters' pens scratching against notepads, cameras clicking quietly, the nation watching as a son who had been branded a failure was about to be revealed in a light no one had expected. My heart thundered against my chest, memories flooding back like waves crashing in a storm, the missions I had taken, the dangers I had walked through without ever telling a soul, the endless nights where I worked jobs that no one respected by day, only to vanish into an entirely different battlefield by night. The Chief Justice turned to me, his eyes holding a kind of recognition that went far beyond the legal documents in front of him. "This man," he declared, pointing at me with a conviction that made the walls shake, "is not who you think he is. He has carried burdens that would break lesser men. He has stood in places where even the strongest falter. And if any of you here believe he is simply an unemployed drifter, then you have been blind to the truth." Gasps filled the room, and my mother sank into her chair, her testimony unraveling like a thread pulled loose from fabric. Suddenly, my shame was no longer mine to carry. Suddenly, the man the world mocked was standing taller than the whispers, and every secret I had buried was clawing its way to the surface. I knew then that the trial wasn't just about my mother's betrayal, it was about revealing who I really was. And trust me, what came next left the courtroom, and the world, stunned forever.